Wall Street was rejoicing when we got news not only of a possible deal on China yesterday and particularly delaying tariffs, but the thought that we were going to avoid another government shutdown. In other words, a way to keep the lights on through the end of the fiscal year, September 30th of next year. But it's the way we went about it with Band-Aids and sort of good luck charms that riles my next guest. He follows this very, very closely and says that we're spending money like it's nobody's business, and it's money we don't have already. Stanford School of Business lecturer Dave Dodson on what he doesn't like about this latest effort, because it's not much of a fiscal effort, is it?
I don't know where to begin, Neil. I mean, this is what happens when you have the tax and spend party and the borrow and spend party come together to try to do a deal at the last minute. And by the way, you mentioned this is a deal that was started in June when Mitch McConnell, if you can imagine this, called President Trump and said, quote, "No one ever lost an election by spending money."
Wow.
Now, and remember, President Trump in 2011, he criticized the Republican Party for raising the debt ceiling when Obama was spending so much money. And he said, "I'm embarrassed to be a Republican." That's in 2011. So what do we have now with the tax and spend party and the borrow and spend party? We have $320 billion increase in our deficit in the best possible economic times than you and I have had in our lifetime.
Right.
And imagine, meanwhile, they're cooking the books. And they're cooking the books and lying to us in exactly the same way that Jeff Skilling from Enron was cooking the books.
Explain that.
Okay, so every year the Treasury Department is required to issue a report on what the true total debt is of the federal government. And it is $47 trillion. These are their numbers, Neil. $47 trillion more than the stated $22 trillion budget. That's Jeff Skilling like, okay?
Where is that extra $25 trillion?
Unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, mostly entitlements. And, you know, so meanwhile, of the $22 trillion that we have borrowed, 6 of that is coming from retirement funds and temporarily overfunded healthcare funds, and we have no plan to pay it back. If you're in the private sector and you cook the books like that, you go to prison.
Yeah.
Okay? And of course, there's a process, which if you ran a process like that for any company, even if it was the local bookstore, you'd get fired, because what's going to happen now is on Thursday, they announced a deal, and they high-fived and did a victory lap about how proud they were. They're going to work out the details, because the details aren't even worked out, Neil, over the weekend.
Well, you know will be a lot more spending. And you do know the late, great Paul Volcker passed away this week. This was his biggest concern, that both parties were not dealing with this.
They're not. And we have, you know, we're going into 2020, and we've got, you know, a Democratic lineup, which is largely they have not found something that they can't spend money on, whether it's free tuition, et cetera, et cetera. You've got that happening. And then even the deficit hawks, like Senator Scott, won't make the hard decision. So earlier this week, he said he's not going to vote for this. He's going to vote against it. But of course, the Republicans and the Democrats have the votes. He said, "I'm not going to vote for it." And he was pressed on where he would make cuts. The only thing he was willing to go on the record on was $4 million for a Peace Corps program in China teaching learners. $4 million. Where's the other $1 trillion?
So the Republicans won't address defense, you know, Democrats won't address the It's a little simplistic, but unless they can both hold hands together and jump off the cliff, nothing's going to happen.
This government of ours was set up as a requirement to cooperate. You can disagree and still work together, but we set this thing up to say people have to work together and cooperate, and we're not willing to work together and cooperate. So when it comes to spending, just kick the can down the alley, right? And leave it up to our grandchildren to take care of.
Yeah, it depends if you like your grandchildren. You can feel guilty about it or just weigh it.
Well, that's a personal issue.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Thank you very, very much, Professor. And he's quite right about this.